If I have the right to say anything, you certainly have the right to be offended. If I can say anything I want, you can say, Penn shouldn't have said that. And you can say, Penn shouldn't have said that, none of us should talk to him anymore. And Penn shouldn't have said that, he shouldn't have a job. And Penn shouldn't have said that, and he's not funny. Penn shouldn't have said that, we're going to put pickets out in front of the club, and he shouldn't be able to go to that club. All that is within your rights, and very clearly within your rights. But just like every individual has to make a decision on just because they can say something doesn't mean they have to say it. Individuals have to make the decision that just because you might feel offended by something doesn't mean you have to announce you're offended.
Welcome to the NU Digital Classroom. In this video, we're going to be looking at this book by Jonathan Rauch, a really important book called Kindly Inquisitor, right? You know what kindly means, obviously, right? Like polite, nice. What's an inquisitor? Someone that comes with questions. It's just a kindly inquisitor. The new attacks on free thought. And I want to do this in a kind of different way. Well, I've done some presentations like this, but where it's sort of a combination of, you saw Penn Jillette already, and I'm going to have Karl Popper, and then I'm going to have an excerpt from 1984 at the end, and I'm going to kind of try to use those to kind of situate my point today. Love yous, hope you're doing well. I know it's like, I'm going to try to I know some of these presentations, it's like, if we're focusing on complicated things, it can be have almost a little bit of not negative, but a heart-wrenching vibe sometimes, but it's that's not the right word, but I think you know what I mean. I want to try today to be kind of positive, right? And be this is actually a book that when I read, I got some confidence back. It's for anybody over these last few years, it's been tough, right? And it's anyways, I'm going to try to use this to remind people what liberal sciences are, and what that has nothing to do with liberal in the political use of the liberal party or whatever. It's no, liberal science is the thing that's this process for generating information that's supposed to be usable by anyone and repeatable and all these things, and this, how actually suppressing this is one of the worst things you can do to a society and to a people. Because replace, and this isn't scientism, this isn't me saying science should run everything, because we can also point to examples of when that's not a good thing. Literally in this course, we've already looked at Brave New World in 1984 and those kinds of techno dystopias. But your thoughts matter, and your cognitive autonomy matters, and your cognitive resilience matters. And I want to try to give some force to the philosophy that would support that idea. Real liberalism, John Locke liberalism, not Justin Trudeau liberalism, whatever. It's I don't like any of the politicians, so it depends. Just name the party and I'll talk trash. It's not like I'm political or trying to push you in a direction. It's because I don't believe our answer to any of this is political, and maybe there's aspects of it that are. This is much deeper. This is psychological, spiritual, and social, deeply social and relational. Kindly Inquisitor, welcome to the presentation. Let's get into it. That's a kind of rambly intro, but I've missed you. I haven't made a video in a bit, and I'm standing, so it's a different dynamic, but I'll get used to it. Let's get into it. So in this book, which is actually a pretty awesome read, and I would recommend taking a look at it at some time if you're interested. And it's really a kind of continuation of ideas of an earlier thinker named Karl Popper, who some of you have, if you've taken classes with me before, maybe even done projects on or have looked at. Another kind of academic heavyweight. And one of the things that Raj is saying in this book is that, well, he's critiquing this authoritarian method of determining truth. That's just like basically that's a pretty straightforward way of saying he's basically this idea of like having people telling you what you're allowed to think. That's the opposite of liberal science. That's thought pleasing. And Roach describes this liberal science as this decentralized method of public criticism through which we refine our knowledge through falsification, right? So it's this way of like, oh, I have this idea, and you test this idea, and you find that it's actually false, but it's like not totally wrong, but I was looking at it from a slightly wrong angle. So then we kind of go, you know, the old saying, go back to the drawing board, and you make your adaptations to your prototype, and then you try it out again, you keep trying to find out where your idea is wrong, and when you can't find out that it's wrong anymore, it's like maybe you got something to work with there. And it's like that was the kind of sloppy way of trying to define just freestyled falsification, right? It's like that's a cornerstone of science. It's like if I have this idea that I think that, I don't know, I was about to use some example related to electricity, but if I knew some idea about some new theory of how to send power from one place to another, and I want to test it, but I need to spend time looking into ways that could be wrong, right? Or it's like falsification is the opposite of the kind of common trend nowadays, which is called verificationism, or just like looking for everything that supports your idea. Right? If you really have an idea that you're trying to chase, it's like the more you can rule out the fact that other factors might be determining the outcomes that you think your factor is determining, the more your factor might actually be the thing determining. That's what we kind of call theory, right? That you have an hypothesis, you try to prove it wrong. If you can't prove it wrong, it stands, and it becomes part of this sort of body of knowledge, right? And again, this is where I'm going to try to be a bit kind of philosophical in this presentation, because then again, we have to get to this difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? It's like we can kind of define that really loosely as knowledge is sort of the context of the information and your ability to utilize and use it, and wisdom is sort of the reflective internalization of the essence of all of it in some kind of like deeply personalized, embodied way that would have to take a better thought out, not freestyle definition, but like, and I'm not freestyling this presentation, I obviously pre-constructed it, but I'm just sort of rambling this point a bit, and think of those as two different things. There's two ways you could be told information. You could have official broadcasters, which I hope are different than teachers, right? Like it's like, or you can have liberal sciences. And again, liberal not in the political sense, liberal meaning in that it's like a one shoe fits all. This is for everybody. Everybody can use this. And it's like if you wanted to help the poorest people in the world, teach them the scientific method and get them cheap energy as fast as possible. It's really like because we're going to see is liberal science and the scientific method is basically the same thing. Liberal science is sort of the kind of thought paradigm in which the scientific method resides in, that actually like that there's a reality that's observable, and that the better we get at asking questions, the better our understanding of that reality can be, and that we can develop methods of fine-tuning our questioning and finding ways to attempt to falsify our questions so that we can actually understand if we're asking, so we can ask better and better questions that get us closer and closer to some real thing. And the thing is that if you add all kinds of layers of if, ands, and buts to that process, it doesn't work the same. This is gonna be sorry. This is gonna be my point where I make the once a presentation comment that it's just an honor to be able to. I don't know. I feel it's a blessing that I have this opportunity, not like at a human level. I mean, so look at this for a sec. So this is like looking at the. I'm gonna try to look at the camera because the monitor's lower, but looking at this idea of like what the scientific process is, and I just want to read this for a second, that we need a system, or make this point that like think of liberal science as conflict resolution. It's like if I thought that in this book it made that point in maybe the most articulate way I've ever seen that presented is actually if you're standing on one side of the room and saying I believe this no matter what, and I'm standing on the other side of the room and saying I believe this no matter what, and we're both saying no matter what, so we're both not budging, we need some conflict resolution strategy, some kind of process of testing the truthfulness of ideas. We observe things in our world. We have hypotheses or ideas about what we're seeing, but then we try to falsify that hypothesis. This is basically the scientific method, right? So if you're being asked in the future to write research papers and stuff like that, it's like this is like a kind of core idea. And I don't mean, I know that you probably already know this, but I just want to like add my 2 cents into this, right? Because I think the more you big picture look at this, the more it makes sense that basically a thesis is a point that you're making, right? You have a thesis that this is related to this. And you think that because you have these hypotheses or these ideas about things, right? And that those ideas about things are based on the observations that you've had. And then you can test those ideas. Well, okay, so if this relates to this, what if we manipulate one of these variables, right? And that's where you get into kind of discussion of things like independent and dependent variables and what's influencing and what's being influenced. So then you test out it basically, right? Then you get your results, and if your results kind of prove what you're thinking, then it's like, okay, for that point, it stands as scientific theory. And if it's not consistent, right? And basically, if you get like if we're talking about stats, if you get like insignificant results, then it's like maybe then it's back to the drawing board. That idea I said earlier, and that's actually kind of how you get better at things. And it's like that's why. It's like I'm trying not to just give like a completely like a Tesla or like an Einstein or like a just an Edison example of somebody that just like failed over and over and over and eventually got this thing that's super useful. It's like, or it's like every time, even in your own personal experience, something goes like a bit wrong and you can fine tune and adjust, and you're just like a little bit more prepared for future interactions or situations or skill demands or whatever it is. But what really hit me in this book, and I remember doing this as I think I read this maybe about a year and a half ago, and I actually listened to it as an audiobook, and this idea of in a time of uncertainty that like actually this core idea of falsification that has philosophical roots in people like Karl Popper, but also going back to people like Descartes, right? And if you remember to that presentation, and the reason I'm trying to do this is because I'm trying to show that this is actually, there's actually a philosophical mountain under which we stand that can get you through tough days. I don't even know why I said that. Okay, anyways, back to my point. So we need a system of rules to arriving at consensus agreement without eventually destroying the system itself, right? It's like, and this is so complicated to talk about this, but it's like, this is why this is such a tough thing. It's like, this is why like scientists need to be scientists and researchers need to be researchers and teachers need to be teachers. Since we live in a complex, diverse world rife with disagreement, it's important to devise systems that can be resistant to being corrupted by bad actors. Exactly. Thank you, Roach. That's a better way of saying what I was trying to say. one of the main points in Kindly Inquisitor is this concept that, like, if we're going to talk about science, and if we're going to have actual conversation, and if we're going to heal divides, and if we're going to be able to have authentic discourse, then there needs to sort of be what he says, these two rules of liberal science. And again, it's like there might be situations where you're saying, like, okay, well, again, what he's saying, these are preconditions for us to be saying that we're engaging in what has traditionally been called liberal science. It's like people should have a right to participate. You don't get to say that it's the final word and no one else can say anything. And you don't also get to say that it's that because you say it's that. And as long as we accept those two rules, then we can engage. And if we don't, then we're not in this world of the science, of like the liberal sciences and of the scientific method. We're in a world that would more traditionally be the world of religious faith, right? If it's more at this level of people in position that have no matter what, they're not budging, then we just need to be honest that we're just not talking about science then. That the precondition for science is I should be able to say, I think that this is the case, and you should be able to say, like, I'm sorry, Mike, you might be the teacher, but you're wrong. And your ability to say that I'm wrong on points on this presentation is sort of the point too, right? It's like, I'm not perfect. I'm trying my best to, like, be as honest and like, teach this stuff as best I can. It's like, from the feedback I've gotten and from your assignments especially, it's like I can see that you're trying to deal with these difficult topics as best as you can too, and it's been inspiring, to be honest. No one gets final say, no one has personal authority, and these two rules are actually, if you look at it in the deepest way, actually good for everybody, because it again, no system's perfect. It reduces the ability for easy corruption. Because as soon as someone gets last say, and it's because they're saying it, again, that's authoritarian information sharing. Then now you're being told what you think. These two simple rules, the liberal order for sorting facts and fiction gradually evolves. Right? So our ability to figure out what's real and not gradually evolves. And saying, like, the analogy to Darwin is apt here. It makes sense. Ideas are refined through trial and error, through open disagreement, public criticism, and experiment replication, doing it over and over. And because no topic is ever closed off to being challenged in the future, no final say, any idea can be critiqued and disproved, regardless of how long it's been around. Sometimes the fittest idea for one age loses their adaptation in another. Fittest ideas in one age lose their adaptation in another. Right, so then you get to this point of understanding that actually in science, what theory is sort of like a placeholder until a higher resolution understanding can replace that piece of theory. Right, so say we're trying to, it makes more sense if we're talking about, like, or easier explanation if we're talking about something like the natural sciences, and we're looking at something like our understanding of trees and how trees influence the plants around them. And it's like, we understand that to quite a degree, and it's like, but in the future we'll understand that better. And it's almost like, if you think of it as a higher resolution or a better quality picture that sort of gets better and better through this trial and error process of learning more and more. And again, this is like just speaking in huge paintbrushes of this whole enterprise called science or knowledge generation, or the arts, humanities, and sciences. And in this presentation, I'm sort of doing like an overview of the main points of that book. And one of the things that he highlights really well in Kindly Inquisitor is this idea of, like, there's sort of 5 ways as a society. There's 5 ways that as a society we can make sense of like what's true and what's not true. It's like the first way is fundamentally like it's like you could have basically the way that for most of our ancestors it would have been, that there was basically a religious understanding of things regardless of the part of the world we were from. You know, basically everyone in the past had some type of underlying religion. Of course, there's probably examples where that's not the case, but and if that person's sort of telling you what you're supposed to, how you make sense of the world, right? So that those who know the truth decide who is right. There's one level. And so then the next level would be like a simple egalitarian principle, like a more fairness principle that everybody should kind of be able to express their ideas. And then so he's kind of saying this as progressing towards kind of this liberal principle. He's saying then there could be this like third way it could be done, this like kind of radical egalitarian. So more intense radical egalitarian, meaning like more equal, peer-to-peer, like the simple egalitarian principle, so like the one before, but the beliefs of the person in historically oppressed classes or groups get special consideration, right? So it's like this fairness, it's like super fairness. Then the fourth is the humanitarian principle, any of the above, but with the condition that the first priority is to not hurt at all. So he makes this complicated argument in the book that basically it's a difficult point to make of how humanitarian principles can interfere with science, because like if humanitarianism is about not doing any harm, how can that ever not be 100% positive? And the answer is it's actually pretty complicated to answer that question, but like again, what are we talking about here? We're talking about being able to see what's true and what's not true. And sometimes what's true hurts feelings. And again, I understand how cold that sounds, but this applies to like a million different topics, right? And then so he makes the argument that so those are the different ways, right? Fundamentalist, simple egalitarian, radical egalitarian, humanitarian. He's saying like all those could be fine, but you have like it needs that last variable of like, okay, so all those things kind of get put onto the table, and even like and it might sound like I'm making an argument against these other ones, but I'm kind of not. It could be like, okay, well, we believe this because this is what we believe, and then the next group's like, okay, well, everybody like has their ideas. You can almost think about these as like different philosophical ideas that exist at the same table of thought, and then the next person has like this idea of like, okay, well, everyone should have a say, but then some people have had like more oppression, so that they should have maybe be able to talk first on these certain issues and stuff, and that can all make sense. And like obviously there's scenarios where that makes sense, and then there's a humanitarian idea of like being conscious of not causing harm. But then that whole conversation still needs to be testable. It has to be hypothesis based, or it gets prescriptive, right? And I'm trying not to just say the word religious, because that makes it sound like I'm saying that that's bad, and I'm totally not, because there's all kinds of benefits associated with religious. But and there's nothing necessarily wrong about religion or in any, well, I'm trying not to jump concepts too huge here. The point I'm saying though is like when we get talking about political things and our thinking gets religious, which is Nietzsche's big warning, then you can seriously question whether people are actually interested in truth or not. another point that he says is this is like the difficult part of it, and this is something your generation is needing to deal with, is that, and me and myself too, is that these things that are like, okay, so say somebody is really set in stone on a certain idea and they think it's really important, they really need to protect it, and then you can see that as fine, that's fine, whatever. Somebody else is really like wanting to help people in need, that are oppressed or in need, and you can totally understand that. Then there's people that like don't want people to be mean to other people, and you can understand that. But what Rauch warns is that that kind of talking isn't new at all, and that it pushes towards. And then we got to break down, like, what would totalitarianism mean? What does that word mean? Why does it have the word total literally in it? It's like totalism, you could say, but it's like total plus the word authoritarian almost, right? Like you got that tarian aspect of the word. So it's like total authoritarian. It's like, okay, if we're gonna protect a certain set of ideas, again, like it's like protect the truth, as if there's a specific truth that a specific people know, right? And that then, again, these are all, like, his point is that all these things, although like stand alone, you can understand the points that they provide a fundamental threat to open liberal societies, because it's going to, whether intentionally or not, create totalitarian situations. The only way to respond to those three requests at the exact same time, at the level it's coming at, with the political motive power behind it, is, well, this push towards like full spectrum dominance, or like full totalitarianism, right? Authoritarianism across the board, across the spectrum. Okay, I'm gonna get it this time. This is like my 5th try on this slide. Okay, because I keep forgetting to preview what's on the next slide, so I'm going to say that at the beginning, and then I'll make the point about this slide. On the next slide is going to be Karl Popper, and I wanted you to hear his own words, and somebody did an awesome job of transcribing it, and like not just like little transcription at the bottom of the screen. It's actually like most of the screen, and you can tell, since it's not like I don't know what his native language is. I'm not sure if he's speaking in German or in French, but it's the transcription is excellent, because he's talking about pretty complex things that you really need to like fully see the points he's making, and because he's kind of listing things, and he's making this argument of what he thinks is philosophy, or more specifically what he thinks isn't philosophy. And I think it's useful for you to see it. And again, if you're time crunched and you wanted to skip that part, it's about 10 minutes, but I think it's definitely worthwhile. I'm going to present it without comment and then sort of get back to the presentation. So Popper's one of the main ideas, and he writes about all kinds of stuff, but one of the main ideas he's talking about here is that because the scientific method has been developed in a context where ideas were tested, it's not well prepared to respond to groups of scholars making untested assertions as if they're tested assertions. Because they're playing like they're playing the game without playing the game, and the game wasn't designed to defend against that, sort of, right? And he's saying that, I mean, I don't know why I got all metaphorical there, because he's talking about like that at like a society level. That one of the reasons that open societies are open to attack is because they're assuming the good intentions. Right? And that's getting kind of philosophically close to like almost a Machiavellian idea, right? One of Machiavelli and the Prince, one of the big ideas is that like one of the problems, or one of the challenges of trying to be a good person when you're competing with people that are willing to do things that aren't good, is that they have more tools in their toolkit, so you have to adapt to that either, right? And it's like, You have to either do the bad things or be way better. And or be like at a different level.
Ich will jetzt gegen 7 Auffassungen von der Philosophie sprechen, die gegenwärtig sehr oft als charakteristisch für die Philosophie angesehen werden, die aber meiner Meinung nach unbefriedigend sind. Für diesen Teil meiner Vorlesungen könnte ich den Titel wählen, wie ich die Philosophie nicht sehe. Erstens. Die Aufgabe der Philosophie ist nicht das Auflösen von Denkschwierigkeiten oder von Missverständnissen, obwohl solche Auflösungen manchmal nötige Vorarbeiten sein können. Zweitens. Ich halte die Philosophie nicht für eine Galerie von Kunstwerken, von verblüffenden und originellen Weltbildern oder von klugen und ungewöhnlichen Beschreibungen der Welt. Ich glaube, wir tun den großen Philosophen schweres Unrecht, wenn wir die Philosophie so verstehen. Die großen Philosophen verfolgten nicht ästhetische Ziele. Sie wollten nicht Baumeister scharfsinniger Systeme sein. Sie waren vielmehr vor allem Wahrheitssucher, ähnlich wie die großen Wissenschaftler. Sie suchten wirkliche Lösungen echter Probleme. Ich sehe die Geschichte der großen Philosophien als einen Teil der Geschichte der Wahrheitssuche. Und ich lehne ihre rein ästhetische Beurteilung ab, obwohl ich zugebe, dass Schönheit nicht nur im Leben, sondern auch in der Philosophie und in der Wissenschaft von großer Bedeutung ist. Schönheit in der Philosophie und in der Wissenschaft hängt oft davon ab, dass wir den Mut haben, etwas neu durchzudenken. Ich bin sehr für intellektuellen Wagemut. Wir können nicht intellektuelle Feiglinge und Wahrheitssucher zugleich sein. Drittens. Ich betrachte die philosophischen Systeme nicht als intellektuelle Bauwerke, an denen alle möglichen Ideen ausprobiert werden und in denen die Wahrheit vielleicht als ein Nebenprodukt zum Vorschein kommt. Ich glaube, wir tun den wahrhaft großen Philosophen der Vergangenheit Unrecht, wenn wir auch nur einen Moment lang daran zweifeln, dass jeder von ihnen sein System aufgegeben hätte, wenn er sich davon überzeugt hätte, dass es vielleicht brillant, aber kein Schritt in der Richtung auf die Wahrheit hin sei. Das ist übrigens der Grund, warum ich Fichte oder Hegel nicht für große Philosophen halte. Ich misstraue ihrer Wahrheitsliebe. Viertens. Ich halte die Philosophie nicht für einen Versuch zur Klärung, zur Analyse oder zur Definition von Begriffen oder von Worten. Begriffe oder Worte sind bloße Werkzeuge zur Formulierung von Aussagen, von Hypothesen, Vermutungen, Annahmen oder Theorien. Begriffe oder Worte als solche können weder wahr noch falsch sein. Sie dienen nur der beschreibenden und argumentierenden menschlichen Sprache. Es sollte nicht unser Ziel sein, Bedeutungen zu analysieren, sondern wir sollten nach interessanten und bedeutsamen Wahrheiten suchen. Das heißt nach wahren Theorien. Fünftens. Ich halte die Philosophie nicht für ein Mittel zu zeigen, wie gescheit man ist. Sechstens. Ich sehe in der Philosophie nicht das Bestreben, sich präziser oder exakter auszudrücken. Und natürlich schon gar nicht, sich kompliziert auszudrücken. Präzision und Exaktheit sind keine intellektuellen Werte an sich, und wir sollten nie versuchen, präziser und exakter zu sein, als es das uns eben vorliegende Problem erfordert. Aber Klarheit ist ein intellektueller Wert. Siebtens. Ich verstehe die Philosophie auch nicht als Ausdruck des Zeitgeistes. Das ist eine Hegelsche Idee, die der Kritik nicht standhält. Es gibt allerdings Moden in der Philosophie und auch in der Wissenschaft. Aber wer ernsthaft nach der Wahrheit sucht, wird nicht der Mode folgen. Er wird vielmehr den Moden misstrauen und sie, wenn nötig, bekämpfen. Das sind meine 7 Punkte, wie ich die Philosophie nicht sehe. Ich glaube, dass alle Menschen Philosophen sind. Auch wenn sie sich nicht bewusst sind, philosophische Probleme zu haben, so haben sie doch zumindest philosophische Vorurteile. Die meisten davon sind Theorien, die sie als selbstverständlich akzeptieren. Sie haben sie aus ihrer geistigen Umwelt oder aus der Tradition übernommen. Da nur wenige solche Theorien uns ganz zum Bewusstsein kommen, so sind sie Vorurteile in dem Sinn, dass sie meistens ohne kritische Prüfung vertreten werden, obwohl sie von großer Bedeutung für das praktische Handeln und für das ganze Leben der Menschen sein können. Solche Theorien sind die Ausgangspunkte aller Wissenschaft und aller Philosophie. Aber sie sind und bleiben unsichere Ausgangspunkte. Jede Philosophie muss mit den unsicheren und oft verderblichen Ansichten des unkritischen Alltagsverstandes anfangen. Ziel ist der aufgeklärte, kritische Alltagsverstand, die Erreichung eines Standpunkts, der der Wahrheit näher ist und der einen wenig schlimmen Einfluss auf das menschliche Leben hat als manche der ungeprüften Vorurteile. Ich möchte hier einige Beispiele von weit verbreiteten und gefährlichen philosophischen Vorurteilen anführen. Es gibt eine sehr einflussreiche philosophische Auffassung vom Leben, die meint, irgendjemand müsse verantwortlich sein, wenn etwas Böses in dieser Welt geschieht. Jemand muss es getan haben, und zwar absichtlich. Diese Auffassung ist sehr alt. Bei Homer waren die Eifersucht und der Zorn der Götter für die meisten der schrecklichen Vorkommnisse verantwortlich, die im Feld vor Troja und in der Stadt selbst geschahen. Später im christlichen Denken ist der Teufel für das Böse verantwortlich. Und im Vulgärmarxismus ist es die Verschwörung habgieriger Kapitalisten, die das Kommen des Sozialismus und damit die Gründung des Himmelreichs auf Erden verhindern. Die Theorie, dass Krieg, Armut und Arbeitslosigkeit die Folgen böser Absichten und finsterer Pläne sind, ist ein Teil des Alltagsverstandes, aber sie ist unkritisch. Ich habe diese unkritische Theorie die Verschwörungstheorie der Gesellschaft genannt. Die Theorie ist weit verbreitet. Sie führt zur Suche nach einem Sündenbock. Und sie hat Verfolgungen und fürchterliche Leiden hervorgebracht. Ein wichtiger Zug der Verschwörungstheorie der Gesellschaft ist, dass sie zu wirklichen Verschwörungen ermutigt. Doch eine kritische Untersuchung zeigt, dass Verschwörungen kaum je ihr Ziel wirklich erreichen. Lenin, der die Verschwörungstheorie vertrat, war ein Verschwörer, auch Mussolini und Hitler. Aber Lenins Ziele wurden in Russland nicht verwirklicht, so wenig wie Mussolinis oder Hitlers Ziele in Italien oder in Deutschland. Sie alle wurden Verschwörer, weil sie unkritisch an die Verschwörungstheorie der Gesellschaft glaubten. Es ist ein bescheidener, aber vielleicht nicht ganz unwichtiger Beitrag zur Philosophie, auf die Fehler der Verschwörungstheorie der Gesellschaft aufmerksam zu machen. Darüber hinaus führt dieser Beitrag zur Aufdeckung der großen Bedeutung der unbeabsichtigten Folgen menschlicher Handlungen für die Gesellschaft. Und er führt weiter dazu, die Aufgabe der theoretischen Sozialwissenschaften darin zu sehen, dass sie die sozialen Erscheinungen als die unbeabsichtigten Folgen unseres Handelns erklären sollen. Ein anderes Beispiel philosophischer Vorurteile ist das Vorurteil, die Meinungen eines Menschen seien stets durch seine Interessen bestimmt. Diese Theorie wendet man in der Regel nicht auf sich selbst an, sie wird vielmehr gewöhnlich nur auf die anderen angewendet, besonders auf die, deren Meinungen mit den unseren nicht übereinstimmen. Das hindert uns aber daran, neue Ansichten mit Geduld anzuhören und ernst zu nehmen, denn wir können sie ja durch die Interessen der anderen wegerklären. Damit aber wird eine rationale Diskussion unmöglich. Unsere natürliche Wissbegierde, unser Interesse an der Wahrheit über die Dinge verkümmert. An die Stelle der wichtigen Frage, wo liegt die Wahrheit in dieser Sache, drängt sich eine andere Frage herein, eine bei weitem weniger wichtige Frage. Was ist dein Interesse? Welche Motive beeinflussen deine Meinung? So werden wir verhindert, von denen, deren Meinung sich von der unseren unterscheidet, zu lernen. Die übernationale Einheit der menschlichen Vernunft wird zerstört, jene Einheit, die auf unserer gemeinsamen Rationalität beruht. Ein ähnliches philosophisches Vorurteil ist die gegenwärtig außerordentlich einflussreiche These, eine rationale Diskussion sei nur zwischen denen möglich, die in Grundsätzlichen übereinstimmen. Diese verderbliche Lehre besagt, dass eine rationale oder kritische Diskussion über Grundlagenfragen unmöglich ist. Sie führt zu ebenso unerwünschten und nihilistischen Konsequenzen wie die verschiedenen zuvor besprochenen Theorien. Diese Theorien werden von vielen vertreten. Ihre Kritik gehört zum Aufgabenbereich der Philosophie.
So just to sort of wrap this up, and this is going to be one of the shorter presentations, except that at the end I do want to add, I'm going to add a piece and kind of present it without comment. The idea of no one getting final say. Is actually an important rule because it allows, it keeps anyone from being able to silence you or me, and it's not even about silencing and censorship necessarily. It's about this, well, again, in the book it keeps using the term liberal science, but that's just the language he's using. It's like you can more generally say this idea of like, does 2 + 2 = 4? Does the world that you're seeing matter? Are you allowed to ask questions? Are you allowed to say that that doesn't sound right to me? Are you allowed to agree with 80% of what I'm saying and have a problem with 5% and kind of agree with 10% and not agree totally with 5%, but recognize that like I'm trying to do my best and like no one's gonna like every single thing everyone says? It's like, what level of nuance are you engaging the social world in? And this is where it gets to Russell's, the great thinker, like Bernard Russell's idea of like order without authority, that we can be like well constructed in our thinking without having to tell people what to think. And that doesn't mean like, I'm obviously, and I don't want to move into just a broader discussion on censorship, but like, I have 2 young kids. I think that there should be age appropriateness stuff around them. And you could have long, interesting conversations about how that fits within a liberal framework. And as long as we're being honest, that discussion can be fruitful. And then that second part, that no one has personal authority, because it's like, well, then the game's over before it starts. It's foreclosure. That this is actually like an empirical idea that like the methods used to check statements should be the same regardless of the identity of the checker or the source of the statement. And when I mean it's an empirical rule, I just mean, again, it's like, if you're saying you're doing science. This is only relevant if we're saying that we're doing science and that we're academics. Right? If we're doing motivated broadcasting or whatever, then say whatever you want. But if I don't mean that, I'm like, obviously, but I'm just saying like the claim that I'm trying to represent Roach's idea that the problem is this loss of authenticity and genuineness. right? And it's like, oh, and that last point, just that like the system or like the person deciding what's right and what's wrong, or like the system, like the science, the method. So it's basically like the system shouldn't distinguish between participants. It's like if I do the experiment and you do the experiment, it should be the same result. And it's like that makes the most sense if we're talking about something very physical. If we're talking about like how a certain chemical reacts to another chemical, and I do it and you can do it, and 1,000 people can do it, and we can do it in different situations. And it's like, okay, well, it seems like that chemical mixed with that chemical does that thing. It doesn't seem to matter who's doing it. And this is where there's like this interesting tension that's been existing for like 50 years between like what you would call like the hard sciences and more like the social sciences or the humanities, around this idea of like using the language of research. And don't think I'm like dissing like qualitative research. Like my PhD was in qualitative research. Like qualitative research is highly valuable, interview-based research, video ethnography kind of stuff, all that kind of whether you're talking about like grounded theory or different kinds of like interpretive paradigms, it's like all that stuff has value, big time. What he's saying isn't that. He's not arguing like for stats over interviews as a method of data collection. He's like, he's arguing for you to be able to ask real questions, seek real answers. Yeah, I guess I'm just gonna leave it at that. So Roach presents this idea that some of the greatest philosophical innovations or qualities that the liberal system of science, right? And again, we're kind of going back to Enlightenment here. So this is sort of starting with people like in the other presentation, I said that the kind of person that sort of is often talked about at the beginning of the scientific Enlightenment or the Enlightenment scientific revolution a little bit earlier, right? So it's like kind of similar though. So whether you're talking about like Da Vinci and the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment, usually it's more like Bacon, right? Francis Bacon, the Shakespeare era. And it's like, you have to remember too the time period. And that's why in that presentation, and I hope it wasn't super boring, but I was like really trying to make this point that like understanding the context along a timeline helps with things where you have to realize like one of the reasons there is so much thought around how do we create a system that is like fair for anyone to use, like theoretically, like as a system of science I'm talking about, it's like being done in a context where people were being told what to think, right? It's like right after the Protestant Reformation, basically. Those things are obviously connected in some super complicated way. People started to gain more independence. They started to want to not be controlled, not be told, want to actually test things. So I hope this was kind of interesting. This sort of is a standalone presentation. This isn't directly tied to any assignment or anything. And this is situated within the broader discussion of this self and other, and how it's complicated being a person these days in a situation where there is a lot of force for you to think certain things. And my point is that the costs of telling yourself you believe things that you clearly don't believe is the destruction of your mental health. It's absolutely degenerative. And you know, I love yous. I hope you found this presentation somewhat interesting. And I don't know, sending good vibes, hopefully, and love from Kitchener. Take care. And now a few words from our sponsor. Cheers. Just joking, but there's one more thing. All right, my friends, I think that 1984 thing I was going to share and relate to this, I think I'm going to save that and do a little kind of standalone video related to that, but just because I wanted to kind of keep this short and to the point, because I'm going to get to the last assignment stuff, and then I still have more content coming, but I want to get out to you all the stuff that you need to kind of finish the course, and then I'll have a couple like wrap up points at the end. Kill our hypotheses rather than each other, right? Let the ideas battle. Cheers. Have a great week, and expect more content from me in the next few days. I'm going to be coming out with the stuff around the assignment like ASAP, and then also more recordings. Have a good afternoon or night or morning, and see you soon.